emergencies in the environment, and how crises create hazards to health. So, as many of you know, environmental emergencies and conflict have both direct and indirect effects, whether it be infrastructure or whether it be personal effects. So tonight we welcome Dr. Ruth Berggren to discuss these issues and her work in Haiti and Louisiana, amongst her many other achievements. But I'll give a quick bio. Okay. Dr. Berggren received her medical degree from Harvard Medical School, followed by a fellowship in infectious disease at the University of Colorado, where she was a Division of AIDS Fellow funded by the NIH. She pioneered a program for the treatment of hepatitis C in persons co-infected with HIV and founded and co-directed the Tulane March program to prevent mother-to-child transmission of HIV in rural Haiti. She grew up in central Haiti and led relief efforts along the Dominican Republic-Haiti border after the 2010 earthquake. She is currently the director at the Center for Medical Humanities and Ethics at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. So let's give a round of applause.
Thank you so much for having us up here. I say us, my husband has joined me. He's the guy standing back there with the glasses on the top of his head. The disasters that I'll discuss today, he was part of, so he may chime in and offer a different point of view from time to time. But really, it's a privilege to be here, so thank you. You know, I did not sign up to be a disaster responder, but I had the experience of living through Hurricane Katrina at Charity Hospital in New Orleans, and then was very moved to go back to Haiti immediately after the Haiti earthquake in 2010, because it is the country of my childhood and the place that nurtured me for 10 years. So how could I not go back? Once having been through a disaster, remembering what it was like to be thirsty and grateful to the person who came to bring me just a glass of water to drink, I knew that there would be something that I'd be able to do going back to Haiti. So these are incredibly complex situations, and you've been here studying about policy and planning, and how nice to be in a non-disastrous situation to think about these things when we have some time to think about them and some calm, and to reflect on lessons learned and implications for what we should do in the future. And maybe you will be part of that in the planning for the future. So this is a slide deck that I've used to talk about not just disaster, but moving from disaster to development, because I know that your focus here is on disaster, but there has to be at some point a movement out of it. And so we'll talk a bit about, just the tiniest little bit about New Orleans. We'll talk in more detail about the Haiti experience post-earthquake, and then I won't be able to have as much time as I want to talk about what we're doing in Haiti right now, moving from disaster to development, but I think I will at least be able to introduce the concept of what we're doing, and then end on a very upbeat song from Haitian colleagues that are fighting for help. Okay, so I won't reiterate all of this outline to you, but I do want to let you know that I have a meme that I want you to keep in mind, and I'll show it to you twice, and that is to think about the determinants of health and how they change during an environmental disaster, okay? And so if you've seen some version of this piegram somewhere along the way when you're talking or thinking about determinants of health, and there's some determinants of health that we can't change, like our gender, you know, our age, we can't change that very well, and our genetics, we can't change our genes, at least not very well yet. But then there's other issues like access to care. Well, that's what all the hullabaloo is about right now, right, with the Obamacare. You'd think that that was all it was about, but really in the grand scheme of things, it's not the biggest determinant of health. The environment and then health behaviors, many of which are determined by our environment. And we see 50% being health behaviors. That doesn't mean that we have agency over 50% of the determinants of our health, because many of our behaviors depend upon the culture that we're in, the role of women in our society, and the availability of resources that we would take advantage of to change our health behavior. Like, I have people in West San Antonio who say to me, well, it's very nice, Dr. Berggren, that you want us to go outside and walk with our children after dinner every night, but in our park there's used needles from the IV drug user. So, you know, do you really think that we should be walking? Is that good for our health? So keep this in mind, because what I would argue is that this piegram, the relative chunks of the pie change in a disaster. And there, when you've had a Hurricane Katrina or a Haiti earthquake, access to care almost goes away, and everything else is subsumed by the environmental factors that will completely determine what your health-seeking behaviors are. Right? So I want to talk to you a little bit about my perspective on global health as we practice it at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio. We really try to emphasize a bi-directional advancement of knowledge. I think that's terribly important, and I hope that's something that you all have emphasized here in your program in international studies, that it doesn't work very well when rich white people go to poor non-white countries and tell everybody else what to do. That's not very functional, and it doesn't usually result in lasting or beneficial change. And so there has to be this idea of a bi-directional advancement of knowledge. And we particularly emphasize a community service learning approach in global health. We hope thereby to be gaining insights into healthcare disparities and the social determinants of health wherever we're visiting. Because we're training future healthcare professionals at my institution, we believe this is a very important approach to increasing the cultural competency of our future healthcare professionals. And all along the way, we encourage everybody to engage in self-reflection and contemplate the roles of healthcare providers and healthcare systems, both at home and abroad. So that's the kind of platform that I'm standing on as I'm addressing you here today. Always, when we enter into a situation, we try to address the community identified needs. We don't come in like the fairy godmother from the ivory tower and say, here, people, here's what you need. We try to find out what is identified locally as the priorities. And we try to establish a consistent and recurring presence where we've been invited. So we're not just doing parachute medicine where we drop in with our duffel bags and hand out a bunch of amoxicillin and then disappear for a while. We'd like to leave skills, not scars. And we like to create opportunities for interprofessional collaboration. And we try to get everyone to set measurable objectives. So these are probably all things that you've been thinking about too, from a variety of different disciplines. So this is my one New Orleans slide in this talk, and it's a picture from our newspaper, the Times-Picayune, sometime weeks after Hurricane Katrina. Tyler and I were faculty at Tulane Medical School at the time, and Tyler was the chief of oncology at Tulane, and I was an infectious disease doc. And it just so happened that August of 2005 was my month to be on the inpatient service at Charity Hospital, taking care of the HIV/AIDS patients. And that was a particularly interesting population to be taken care of. I always like to say that if you're a New Orleanian with HIV/AIDS and you use Charity Hospital as your place to access care, that you are probably among the down and out of the most down and out in the entire United States. So a truly disenfranchised population, which was quite a privilege to work with. So many lessons learned. I think that a couple of things I want to highlight is that disasters bring out both the best and the worst in people. And healthcare providers are no exception. And so we saw the best and the worst of everybody in this situation. And my scenario was that I showed up to the HIV ward where I had 24 patients, and there was supposed to be an entire team of fellow residents, interns, and medical students. And nobody else with an MD after their name showed up to my ward at Hurricane Katrina. However, all of the nurses were there, and the social worker and ancillary personnel. And it turned out, and this is important for you all who study policy, the reason why the nurses showed up and the doctors didn't is that the hospital administration had been extremely meticulous about designing a disaster plan, which we called in New Orleans Code Gray. And the nurses had been schooled in Code Gray, and there was a plan that nurses could sign up to be part of disaster response, and they were eligible actually for disaster pay. And some people openly said, yeah, I'm signed up for the training program. I'm a code gray person, and I signed up, and I expect to get disaster pay when I come to work. Conversely, the physicians at both LSU and Tulane, side-by-side medical schools in New Orleans, had zero. I didn't even know what code gray was. I had never heard of it. I'd been in New Orleans almost 5 years. And I did that year get 2 mandatory hours of training on sexual harassment in the workplace. Now, I'm the first person to tell you that I think training on sexual harassment in the workplace is important and it should be mandatory. But there was a little bit of an imbalance and I think some wrong-headed priorities in 2005. I would rather have had 2 hours of disaster preparedness and half an hour on sexual harassment in the workplace than what we got. So the other thing that was evident is that if you were going to be effective in that setting, that you had to be willing to function outside of the realm of what your degree or your training might warrant you to do. I mean, it's chaos, and so there's a variety of things that need to be done. So you can't just stand back and say, well, I'm an MD and I don't do such and so, or I'm an RN and I won't do that. Everybody had to be very flexible. And there's another phenomenon that happens in disasters, and I don't know if you've talked about it at all, but everybody wants to be the person that's saving the day. And so there's this unfortunate do-gooder mentality where people are so desirous of being the one that saved the day that they kind of let their ego get in the way of actually doing the most effective job that they need to do. So you need to work with the end in mind. And I think a lot about a neurosurgeon who joined me and Tyler in Haiti after the earthquake, because we told him that there was an awful lot of neurological trauma, spinal cord trauma and so forth, and he got there and he really was unable to do anything because there wasn't the proper OR. But he did go around and tend to all the spinal cord patients, all of whom were terribly constipated because they needed to have their bowels disimpacted. So here you had somebody who was actually the chief neurosurgeon at Parkland Hospital, UT Southwestern. And what was he doing when he went to provide care in disaster? He was disimpacting people's bowels. And you know why? It's because that's what needed to be done for those people. He came to help a certain patient population, and that's what the need was. So he swallowed his ego, and he didn't feel that he had wasted his time. And then, you know, all of us felt inside like this woman's body is showing us. And it was easy to fall apart, and in fact, at different times, different people did fall apart, but the thing that helped us remain functional, and I think very effective, and the thing that allows me to look back on my full week of living in Charity Hospital with no power and a bunch of HIV patients is the team. And so nobody's going to be perfect all the time, but if you're surrounded by a really good team, make up for each other's deficits, and you can lift each other up. And then the other thing that I learned that was just so important, which is that if you just concentrate on all of the things around you that need to get done and try to address them, focus on the services that you need to be providing for people, or the suffering of others that you need to relieve, and that takes your mind off of your own anxiety about what's going to happen to you. And that really is very powerful. And the last thing that I think is an important concept that I came away with after my Hurricane Katrina experience is this epitaph that we saw on a gravestone. Our family was traveling through Ecuador, and we visited an old graveyard in Ecuador, and there was an epitaph that said, "Hoy yo, mañana tú," which means, well, today it's me down here pushing up daisies, and tomorrow it's going to be you. So, you know, when we think about motivation for responding to disasters from the outside, it's worth recognizing that it's not just about those people over there who are preparing ourselves, but maybe preparing ourselves for our own disaster. So, you know, I felt like we learned a lot from that experience. We certainly learned that we were unprepared. I was perfectly prepared to deal with sexual harassment in the workplace, but I was totally unprepared to deal with a catastrophe like Hurricane Katrina. And we saw failures at the national level, the local level, and institutional level. And this is another great truth, and maybe it's been a theme that's come out in your conference here this week, which is that you see the disparities, the socioeconomic and health disparities get brought under a magnifying glass. They get thrown into relief and are exposed in disaster situation. Over and over again, we saw politics and ego impeding the rebuilding efforts. I mean, I think the politics and ego were a major impairment to who was going to come and get us out of there. I mean, we didn't need to sit in Charity Hospital for 6 days. Come on. I mean, we had the technology, but you had the governor who was at odds with the mayor, who was disorganized, who was fighting about whether it should be the Coast Guard or should we what should the National Guard be doing, and should people from Texas come in or not? And there was a lot of squabbling about that. Meantime, people's lives were at stake. And then there's this idea that when you have a disaster, that you have to be prepared that violence will follow. And we didn't expect this at all during Hurricane Katrina, but Tyler was there with me, and we both experienced what it was like when a sniper decided to start shooting at doctors and nurses who were outside Charity's emergency room trying to load patients onto boats to get them the hell out of there. And you might say to yourself, what earth was going on? And there are a lot of people who don't want that to have been true. I had phone calls ad nauseum from the Philadelphia Inquirer after Hurricane Katrina was over, after I was out of there, and they were grilling me and grilling Tyler for to know what we saw and what we heard. And we gave them our testimony, and when we read what they finally said, the whole gist of it was they wanted to debunk this idea that there had been excessive violence in New Orleans, because it's an ugly story. That's not very American, is it? To think that people might be shooting at doctors and nurses who are evacuating sick people, sick, poor people out of the hospital. But it did happen. It did happen. And I think that it's not something that we should brush under the rug. I think that as a society, we have yet to really examine that honestly. And if you ask me why I think people were shooting at us, I think that they were, I don't really know, but I can tell you that they were disenfranchised people. That's for sure. I can tell you that they were probably not mentally healthy, for what, acutely or chronically. And I can tell you that they had guns. So you have the combination of those three things. People that are disenfranchised, they're on the outside. They're not mentally well for whatever reason, and they have access to violent weapons. You're going to have violence. And I think it would happen if we had a pandemic flu. And we didn't see so much of it in Haiti, but Haiti is not a country that has access to guns very much. It's a pretty poor country. And there was some violence in distribution of food and that sort of thing. People trampling each other, but it was a different scenario. So getting to Haiti, I just want to review for you a little bit why I've been involved with Haiti, why our health science center in San Antonio continues to get involved in Haiti. We've been doing some primary health care work in both sides of the island. And you heard a little bit about my personal history. I did grow up there. I lived in Haiti for 10 years until the age of 14, and I still speak the language very well. So I hope anybody who goes to do disaster response in any country thinks about the importance of language skills and cultural competency and is prepared beforehand. There was the Prevention of Maternal to Child Transmission program that you heard about my being involved with Mir Ballet. We've been working, because I had to go to the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic to gain access after the earthquake. I got involved in the province of Barahona, and that's the first place we've been doing some of this development work, this disaster to development transition through community health clubs. We also have had a very strong interest in Haiti and the Dominican Republic from the students and faculty at UTESCA. And we've been slowly developing a partnership with the Pan American Health Organization, which is a division of WHO. So that's kind of the background there. And then to put the Haiti earthquake in context, you probably know some of these basic facts, right? It was a 7.0 earthquake, that 250,000 people were killed. That number is still debated, but it was that ballpark. And then at least that many or more were injured, some of them very severely, spinal cord injuries and crush injuries to limbs resulting in amputations. People got trapped under the rubble for days, and then when the ones that got pulled out first were taken to hospitals, whatever hospitals were still functioning that were right there in Port-au-Prince. And what happened is, as time went on, you would hear these stories of people that have been buried for 3 days and they would be pulled out. Well, the person that had been buried for 3 days and got pulled out, there was nowhere to take them because there was no capacity for the overwhelmed hospitals to absorb all of this population. And so they would get put in trucks and driven farther and farther out from Port-au-Prince. So if you do a circle around Port-au-Prince, which is on the coast, but they would go farther and farther away until they finally spilled into the Dominican Republic, which is where I wound up. So a lot of avoidable deaths ensued just because there wasn't the capacity to respond to the surge. And then just to, I don't want to show you a zillion rubble pictures, but this is the Trinity Cathedral in Port-au-Prince. And it's a place that's near and dear to our hearts in the Berggren family because I actually got to take music lessons as a little kid there. I learned how to play the clarinet and actually gave concerts in this cathedral. And that's a beautiful example of colorful Haitian art. I like to give people some positive images of Haiti, not just negative images. Haitian art is lively and colorful and vibrant. And that's the triptych that's inside the cathedral. And this is what it looked like before the earthquake, and this is unfortunately what happened to Trinity Cathedral afterwards. So disastrous consequences. And yet it really wasn't that big of an earthquake. If you look at this graph, which shows you deaths per earthquake on the y-axis versus earthquake magnitude on the x-axis, you can see that in this century even there have been a number of earthquakes that were much greater in magnitude, but Haiti ranks among the top 5 in this century in terms of the numbers of deaths. And what are your thoughts about that? I see Laura looking perplexed.
Why is that squinting? Because I have really bad eyes.
So why do you think that Haiti, although that earthquake was not the largest in magnitude, why did we see such a disastrous death toll?
Really poor infrastructure and just lack of access and poor building, just bad infrastructure.
Which is, so bad infrastructure, and what can we blame? What's the upstream problem causing bad infrastructure or problems? Policy people. Why do countries have bad infrastructure?
Well, inability to build adequate buildings to code and standard is, lack of money and lack of effective governance.
Lack of regulation.
Resources, regulation, governance. So, funnily enough, the reason that I got to go to Jimani in the Buen Samaritano Hospital is because of my Hurricane Katrina experience. It's just one of those funny things about life. The earthquake happened 36 hours after I had just returned from Haiti with a group of medical students. So that was stunning, and my mom called me up in the middle of my work afternoon, and I was mildly irritated and wondered why she's bothering me, and she held up her cell phone to the television, and she was watching CNN, and that's how I learned about the earthquake that was happening. And I didn't spend a lot of time analyzing my response. I just had a desperate feeling that I wanted to get back there and do something to be helpful, because I felt like no matter what the setting, surely I would be able to be helpful in some way, even if I was just translating for surgeons. But it was really hard to get there because the memo went out that if you're not an orthopedic surgeon or an anesthesiologist, you don't have a scalpel in your hand or a gas mask in your hand, we don't want you. We don't care if you do speak Haitian Creole like a sewer rat. There's too many people here, don't come. So I was calling around my contacts, and I remembered that Mitch Handrich, who was the nursing director of my ward at Charity Hospital during Hurricane Katrina, I remember that his response to that disaster had been to join up with a group called Remote Area Medical. And these are some wacky people who actually trained to parachute out of airplanes. so that they can parachute into earthquake disaster areas that would be, areas that may be inaccessible by boat or by car, to provide medical care. So I called up Mitch and I said, yo, Mitch, are you is RAM going to Haiti? And he said, yes. I said, well, can you hook me up, man? Because I can't, nobody will let me on an airplane because I don't have a scalpel in my hand and I'm not an anesthesiologist. And so he put me in touch with this Crocodile Dundee sort of guy named Stan Brock, who was in charge of RAM, and I called him up. And you want to know what kind of vetting I got? So this is a policy pertinent anecdote. How did Stan Brock vet me to see if I was qualified to come down and do earthquake relief work? He was interested in two things. He said, okay, you're a doctor, that's great, but what qualifies you to come and do this? I said, well, I speak Haitian Creole like a sewer rat. That's a compliment in Haiti. You speak like a sewer rat, you're like really from the streets. And I worked with Mitch Handrich during Hurricane Katrina. And he said, you're in, love. So that's funny on the one hand. And I actually was qualified to go and be there, but that's all the vetting I got. Nobody checked my medical license. Nobody checked to see if I really was who I'd say that I was. And so I and a whole bunch of other people piled into this place that's pointed to on the map. It's just over the border in the Dominican Republic. It's called Himani. And what it was is a orphanage that was being built and it hadn't been finished out yet. And there were a few buildings on the campus that were being made into ORs, but just barely. So we had essentially a series of empty concrete block buildings that we used as an area to receive the broken bodies of the people that were being pulled out of the rubble, and now these were the 3-day, 4-day, 5-day post being buried under the rubble. So these were people that had been really pretty traumatized. So very ad hoc response. It was actually built to be serving Haitians within the Dominican Republic, which was problematic. And over the 6 weeks that this ad hoc response went on, the team provided over 6,000 patient days of care, 800 surgeries. Unfortunately, 20% of these were amputations. And about 86 critical patients were able to be evacuated by helicopter. And we did a lot of life and limb sparing procedures, and there were a lot of plastic surgeons who came down, a lot of orthopedic surgeons who did external fixation for these fractures, mostly without x-rays. That was amazing to learn how much can be done orthopedically, maybe not well, but to stabilize people without even having an x-ray. But it was pretty chaotic, okay? They counted 900 volunteers from 70 different organizations from all of these countries. And that was a good news, bad news thing. And on one hand, it was kind of a chaotic ant pile of international do-gooders kind of crawling all over each other. And that had its own set of ethical problems, including who was vetting all these people. The answer was nobody. Nobody vetted me, and most of these other people weren't being vetted. At the same time, as somebody who sat in a flooded hospital for 6 days in the United States of America and wondered why the dogs were getting rescued, I mean, I saw people rescuing dogs in the water in front of Tulane Hospital, in front of Charity Hospital, while the people inside were being just left. So to be in Haiti and see the world come, that was really gratifying. It was really gratifying to see people coming as far away from the United Arab Emirates, Japan, and Korea to help people in Haiti. Okay, I understand you're interested in the environment around here. This is the sort of thing that happens when infrastructure is devastated. Haiti has a sanitation problem to begin with. They don't have a good way to manage their solid waste. But you can see here how things devolved even more after the earthquake. And this is a graphic picture. I want to first tell you that I have permission to show photographs. Any photograph of a suffering person that you see here, I promise you, is someone that I personally spoke to and requested permission to photograph them, explaining that the photographs were to be used for education. But I want you to think about the suffering of this woman the lack of autonomy, the lack of personal agency that she has in this situation, in the face of all of these Japanese, Korean, United Arab Emirates, Spanish, Dominican, American people showing up and saying, hey, I want to help you. Does she have any way of knowing, who's coming to help her when she's down on the ground like this? And this was something that I saw in Haiti, and I recognized it from being in Charity Hospital in New Orleans, which is that in the face of disaster, there's certain very predictable, adaptive human responses, and I think that anybody who's involved in helping needs to be respectful and supportive of these adaptive things. In Charity Hospital, we had a prayer service every afternoon, and everybody came. There was a wonderful chaplain there who would read these amazing passages from Isaiah that sounded like they had been written for our situation in Hurricane Katrina. There were gospel singers that had been participating in Jazz Fest in New Orleans who would sing a cappella, and we actually sang "We Shall Overcome" in the middle of Charity Hospital, surrounded by flood with people shooting at us outside and explosions and fire on the water. And I can't overstress, this is not in the world of logistics and checklists and policy and diplomacy. None of that enters into it, but the human element is something that's not to be ignored. And I think it can really stabilize a very unstable situation. And so this is a scenario where a woman is up in prayer. That's why she's got her hands up like this. She's saying a blessing and a prayer and a pleading prayer for help. And the people all around her are joining in, and they're singing and they're praying over a person who, after spending 3 days buried under the rubble next to a dead sibling, is trying to think about how life is going to go forward from here. These kinds of interventions are exceedingly powerful. Whatever your faith is, or whether you're an atheist or not, it doesn't matter. These are fundamental human adaptations that any relief worker needs to be aware of and be respectful of. They should be condoned and facilitated. And then another kind of human response that I saw both in New Orleans and in Haiti, and that is the idea that everybody wants to be the one that saves the patient. And this is a makeshift OR, and there are just way too many doctors and nurses in there. Count them. They don't need to have them all in there. But try telling any one of those people who moved heaven and earth to get on an airplane and go to Haiti and the DR that they shouldn't be in there, and you're gonna have a pretty interesting reaction. And we saw a lot of evidence of orthopedic surgeons fighting over whose team owned which OR. Really, literally fighting, to the point that the nurses felt that they had to put this sign up on the OR door. Swallow your egos, this is the real world, and they underlined it 3 times. And then you have to be able to adapt. We have this thing called HIPAA in the United States, where you can't share with the public private information about somebody's health. We understand that. Well, in this setting, guess what our charts were? We were taping things like this to the wall next to a child's bed because we had no other way of communicating with each other. The average length of stay for these do-gooders was about 3 days. So if you didn't write anything down, there was absolutely no continuity of care. And then I thought this is a great, brilliant innovation by an orthopedic surgeon. He's got the whole history of that patient actually written on the cast. I thought it was genius. It may not have been HIPAA compliant, but it was genius for that setting. And then this is the crisis within the catastrophe. And this is where, again, for those of you who think about policy and planning for disasters, think a little bit about the importance of understanding history, culture, and language. Day 5 after this operation got set up, we had a magnitude 4 aftershock. And so all of these people that were in those cement block buildings that I showed you panicked. And all they wanted to do was get out, because they had this incredible phobia that the buildings were going to fall down. So they fled, they dragged themselves outdoors. And all of a sudden we had this building, so it was a little minor aftershock, there was no damage to the building. And you see all the workers, they're trying to say, now how are we going to get these people to come back inside? These damn people shouldn't be outdoors, they've got wounds, they're going to get infection. I don't know how how many Dominican officials come to me and say to me, infection. And I said, well, I'm an infectious disease doctor. But the solution that was proposed was that the Dominican soldiers who were nearby at an army base should come over with their uniforms and guns and herd the Haitians back into the concrete block building that they were terrified of. And I was able to persuade the group because of my history with Haiti and my knowledge of the history between Haitians and Dominicans and the tensions and the fear that exists. Explain to them, if you want to really terrify an earthquake victim who's terrified right now and lying on the ground and they're Haitian, bring a Dominican soldier with a gun. Then you will really terrify them. So instead of bringing the Dominican soldiers with guns, we called on a local Haitian pastor who was bilingual. And within 15 minutes, he had that entire camp, and I don't laugh at this, but in 15 minutes, the entire camp was singing. And they were kind of waving their arms up in the air, and there was just a sense of grateful relief that we're not inside that building and we're not going to get crushed, and there's no people with guns that are going to come and hurt us around. And so it might not have been particularly conventional. It might not have been an approach that we would have planned sitting in an office, you know, at USAID in Washington, D.C., but it was an adaptation that reflected understanding of culture and a history and language. So I see that we probably need to move forward. I want to say that there are better ways of doing disaster response, and this is the aerial photograph of the Israeli field hospital that was set up in Port-au-Prince just shortly after the earthquake. They are phenomenally organized. The earthquake happened January 12th at 4:53 p.m. 89 hours later, January 16th at 10 a.m., they had their first patient admission. And this is what their field hospital looked like. They